special monthly edition of Classics with Crystal. Grab a cup of coffee and join me as I discuss The House on Mango Street. Hi, I'm Crystal Joy, contemporary romance author of Completely Captivated, Completely Yours, Shackled Heart, and Shattered Heart. Today, I am so excited to talk to you about The House on Mango Street. So before we get started, I am going to read the back cover blurb. Told in a series of vignettes stunning for their eloquence, The House on Mango Street is Sandra Cisneros' greatly admired novel of a young girl growing up in the Latino section of Chicago. Acclaimed by critics, beloved by children, their parents and grandparents, taught everywhere from inner city grade schools to universities across the country, and translated all over the world, it has entered the canon of coming-of-age classics. Sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes deeply joyous, The House on Mango Street tells the story of Esperanza Cordero, whose neighborhood is one of harsh realities and harsh beauty. Esperanza doesn't want to belong, not to her rundown neighborhood, and not to the low expectations the world has for her. Esperanza's story is that of a young girl coming into her power and inventing for herself what she will become. So like the back cover blurb mentioned, this is a coming-of-age book, and it was published in 1984 by Sandra Cisneros. Sandra Cisneros is a poet. She is a short story writer, novelist, essayist, performer, and artist whose work explores the lives of the working class. Her classic coming-of-age novel, The House on Mango Street, has sold over 6 million copies and has been translated into over 20 languages and is required reading in elementary school, high school, junior high, and universities across the nation. How amazing is that? She's a beautiful writer. Each vignette is written from the point of view of Esperanza, who is a Mexican-American girl who's about 12 years old when the novel begins. And the novel spans about a year time period from when Esperanza and her family move on to Mango Street. The external conflict in the story is that she just doesn't want to be there. She doesn't feel like she belongs, and her parents had all these dreams about winning the lottery and moving into a bigger house, and so she feels like her family doesn't belong there. And her internal conflict is her struggle with identity. So that's what I would like to start with today, is her struggles for identity. And so I am going to read off a few quotes from the book as we go along, because Cisneros' writing is so beautiful that it's hard not to want to share that. So here are some examples of how she struggles with her identity. One of the first vignettes is about boys versus girls. And so she says the differences between the boys and girls. She says, the boys and girls live in separate worlds. The boys in their universe and ours, and us in ours. Sorry. So that's one example. Another example toward the beginning of the book is her name. Her name is Esperanza. It was her great-grandmother's name, and she explains or describes her great-grandma as a wild horse of a woman. I love that description, because you can already picture what type of woman she was. She was sassy and wild and powerful, and somebody who was confident and who knew what she wanted, even if other people didn't agree with her, which kind of explains like that wildness, not always going along with the rules of society. Esperanza explains at the very beginning that kids at school say her name funny. So right from the very beginning, she's struggling with the idea of, that her name is meant to be beautiful, but it doesn't sound that way because of where she lives when they talk about it, when they say her name in English. So she has got boys versus girls. She has her name. She also struggles with her body image. I didn't realize until rereading this book that there are several different verses about her being skinny. So for instance, she talks about these 4 skinny trees. She says, they are the only ones who understand me. 4 skinny trees with skinny necks and pointy elbows like mine. 4 who do not belong here, but are here. Their strength is a secret. I love this description. I can remember being 12 years old, and I remember going through something very similar with body image, because it took my body a little bit longer to develop. And I remember seeing all these girls at school, and they were getting chests, and their hips were widening a little bit, and I was always this skinny little thing, and it always bothered me that it made me almost feel like I wasn't womanly enough. And I think that's what Esperanza is talking about here, is she feels like she should be turning into a woman. She feels like in her mind she's maturing, which she is. Throughout the novel, it seems like she's a very mature 12-year-old girl, and yet she's struggling that her body is not catching up to her mind quite yet. There's another example where she says, "Everything is holding its breath inside of me." I love that line. Another one, she does talk about hips. There's a whole vignette. It's one of the best vignettes in the book, and it's called Hips. And she says, "They bloom like roses. You got to be able to know what to do with hips once you get them." And she actually explains to the reader that she doesn't really know what she's talking about, but she has science on her side, and she's telling these younger girls what hips are meant to do and what you need to do with them once you get them. Once again, that struggle of pretending that she's older than she is, or feeling like she should be more confident in this area, but she's really not. But she's getting away with it because she's talking to these younger girls. She also starts to develop an awareness of boys throughout the novel. So at the beginning, like I said, those boys versus girls, they live in a different universe. But as she gets older, she starts noticing them and treating boys a little bit differently than she did before. They're not just different. Now they're starting to intrigue her, and she wants to intrigue them. So at one point when she goes to a family party, she mentions, it says, "All night the boy who is a man watches me dance. He watched me dance." I love the fact that she has this repetition, because it shows that how exciting it was to know that that boy was watching her, that he noticed her. How many of you can remember that first time when you noticed someone looking at you differently, and you know that they maybe find you attractive, and it makes you feel good, and that's her first step into that awareness of boys, of feeling good that that boy was watching her. An awareness of boys also comes at a cost to her as well as she's getting older. Not necessarily that she's aware of them, but that she does have some situations where where like a man forcefully kisses her. Excuse me, 1 second. There was a message on my phone there. Sorry about that. A man forcefully kisses her when she gets her first job. And then one of the most traumatic vignettes is when she is at a carnival. She's waiting for her friend Sally, and this group of boys, she mentions this group of boys come at her, and the fact that one boy kisses her. She doesn't actually explain what happens to her, but we can definitely infer that she was at least sexually assaulted, possibly raped in this scene. And, this is definitely her loss of innocence at this point. And she talks about Sally. "Sally, why didn't you warn me? Why did you lie to me?" Because Sally made it seem like it was so exciting to have boys like her. And now she all of a sudden she wants these boys to notice her. And when they finally do in this scene, this is not the way that she wants to be noticed and treated, obviously. So it's a really big part of who she is, and once again, really wanting to get out of her neighborhood. She does talk a lot about who she wants to be. You can see that in her struggle with identity too, is when you're feeling like you can't be who you want to be, or you don't feel like you belong, you start dreaming about who you want to be. So she talks a lot about older girls like Alicia. Alicia is an older girl in the neighborhood who has to take care of her family. I think her mom passes away, if I'm correct. And she studies at the university, and so Esperanza really finds strength in knowing that Alicia is trying to get out of her neighborhood. One thing that so that's for the internal conflict. One thing I also must talk about when we talk about the house on Mango Street is the symbolism. So I'm only going to name a few. There are many different examples of symbolism in this book, but when she talks about houses in the book, houses can represent that confinement or the freedom, the success and failure, fantasy and reality. Esperanza defines many people by the houses that they live in. And for her, the house on Mango Street is confinement. She feels stuck. You also see the color red appear throughout the book, and the color red represents what Esperanza dislikes. Red is a very bad color in the book. She dislikes her bright red house. She dislikes the bright red shoes that she tries on with Lucy and Rachel one day. And the red clowns. The red clowns appear in the scene where she is potentially raped, and so that represents that fear. You know, everyone is already scared. A lot of people, I should say, not everyone, can be scared of clowns, and so putting red and pairing that with clowns shows right away when you look at that title, you know something very bad happened to her. Mice is also another example. I talked about Alicia earlier. When Esperanza is talking about Alicia and how she studies at the university, she also talks about how Alicia sees mice and she's scared of mice because mice can represent poverty. You know, when you have a house where they're infested with mice, for Alicia and Esperanza, that represents the poverty in the book. Alicia's scared that she doesn't want to be poor like her family, and Esperanza doesn't want to be poor like her family either. So those are three wonderful examples of symbolism in the book, but we also have to talk about the beautiful poetic language. It's very clear that Sandra Cisneros is a poet when she writes these vignettes. So I'll just give you a few examples of the poetic language. One is a simile. The dog is big, like a man dressed in a dog suit, and runs the same way its owner does, clumsy and wild, and with the limbs flopping all over the place, like untied shoes. So that the simile there is flopping all over the place, like untied shoes, that use of like or as to compare two things. You also have personification. Esperanza personifies Mango Street as a she. Esperanza also notices that many of the female characters are looking out their windows with their sadness on an elbow, and you can kind of picture them just like this, sad, looking out the window, wishing for a different life. You also have metaphors in the book. She says, "Until then, I am a red balloon, a balloon tied to an anchor." So once again, she says, "I am a red balloon and tied to an anchor." How sad is that? Thinking like she's being pulled down, like she's that balloon ready to go into the sky, but she can't. She's being tied down by poverty and by her family. So there's this beautiful, lastly, besides the simile personification and the metaphor, I just want to give you another example of beautiful language. Esperanza mentions that she likes to write, and she likes to write poems, and so her aunt, who is very sick, she reads her a poem, and this is the poem that she reads to her aunt. She says, "I want to be like the waves on the sea, like the clouds in the wind, but I'm me. One day I'll jump out of my skin, I'll shake the sky like 100 violins." How beautiful is that? What I love, and I'll be honest, I don't read a lot of poetry, but I like that this is a short, concise book, but it has so much depth. In a world where we're so busy, these short little vignettes are great because you can pick one up, read it, put it down, and read the next one later. But you still get this beautiful story about this 12-year-old girl who doesn't belong. And what I like about this too is that it's relatable. No matter what age you are or what culture you come from, at its very essence, you have this girl who feels stuck, who wants more than what she has. You know, how many of us can relate to having dreams beyond our circumstances? Don't we all at one point in our lives wish for different circumstances like she does? And that's what always draws me to books, is how relatable they are. And Esperanza, although she's a very different character than me, I feel like I can still relate to this 12-year-old girl living on this street because, you know, sometimes I dream about having a bigger house or a different, you know, neighborhood to live in. But if I look around me, I see that my wonderful neighbors, I love my neighbors, and, you know, and I try to find the best in things. And so a lot of times we can get stuck only looking at the bad things around us, and we forget some of the good that's there too. And so what I like about this is you see the struggle that she's in and that she comes from this bad neighborhood, but at the same time you see these little tidbits of her wonderful family, her caring mom and dad, and the friends she has, and some of her neighbors tied in there too. So I like that there is that balance of showing the struggle but also showing some of the people who are forming who Esperanza is meant to be as she gets older. Thank you so much for joining me today for Classics with Crystal. I hope you enjoyed The House on Mango Street. I highly suggest that you pick it up and read it if you haven't yet, or reread it if you read it a really long time ago. I'd love to know what your favorite parts are, so please don't forget to comment below. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more weekly videos, and go to my author Facebook page, Crystal Joy. Look me up because I'll also be putting the newest classic with Crystal book that I'll be reviewing and analyzing next month. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.